also go to computer audio.
Oh.
Hello?
You can just.
Hi, Bridge.
How you doing? Is that Jackie?
It is. How are you?
Thank God for my daughter who's helping me figure out all this technology.
Well, we have Paula here figuring it out with, although Jen is a techno wizard too.
I am not.
Well,
Don't ever
anyway.
frame me that way.
So once I figured out how comfortable, it's a comfort level, right? Once I figured out how comfortable Paula was with the technology, I was on her like crazy.
Yeah.
So, okay. And I think Tim is on. Is Tim on the call from India? Let's see, Tim. Do you see it's got that funky little thing going on there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Computers just ask them.
Whoa.
Dean, are you with us?
He's muted.
No, that's good.
Can you still hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
I'm not sure who we just lost.
Yeah, I don't know. Jean, are you with us?
He has a 202 number for cell. Oh.
Jackie?
Yes. Hi, Bridge. We hear you perfectly.
Oh, good. I'm not sure I've spoken to a computer. This is great.
Well, I think we should go ahead and get started. I know some other folks are going to join us as they can, and we also got some comments from folks that weren't able to join us. We pulled together some slides just to help guide the conversation, but really we wanted to use this time to share the policy framing document that we sent out about 10 days ago that we hope would guide our conversation moving forward. We wanted to hear from all of you what the priority topics and conversations, making sure we hit the mark in terms of the questions that we were posing, and then just close out by talking about our upcoming meeting schedule and the process moving forward. So, figured we'd do just some quick introductions so we can figure out who is both here with us and on the phone. Bridge, we're gonna let you go first and kind of lead us through maybe a little bit of a roll call.
Okay, well, this is Bridge. Thank you all for joining. Could we go around and Jean is on the line, right, Jean?
Yes, good morning, everyone. This is Gene Wilhoit.
Good, and I think I heard Dr. Comer.
Yep, Jim Comer.
Wonderful. Who else do we have?
Is there anyone else on the phone? Okay, we don't know who those numbers are.
Yeah, there's some numbers. We're just not clear who they are. I think Tim Shriver might be listening. We're unclear. So we'll do some introductions of folks that are here in the room. Ross, do you want?
And Ross Weiner from the Aspen team and the commission.
Jackie Dowdle, Director of the Commission.
And this is Jennifer, and finally,
Paula Kim, with the Research and Policy Associate.
Okay, so we'll just keep going, and hopefully other folks will call out when they join in. How to go forward. Sorry, guys. We think we're good at technology, but we're actually not.
I don't even think it.
It makes the older guys feel better, Jennifer.
That's right.
I should mention Linda, and Linda had intended to be on this call, but she's really sick with vertigo, and so she had to cancel at the last minute. But we are going to make sure. She's really excited about the work, and really excited. So that's great that she's going to be involved.
Jim Shelton did send his apologies that he wasn't able to join us, but he sent us some comments which we can build into our discussion today. And we are both recording this meeting and plan to follow up with all of the other subcommittee members to make sure that we get their thoughts and feedback as we continue to move forward. So as I mentioned before, we do have, 3 hopefully achievable goals for today's meeting around reviewing our framing document, getting your feedback, and then talking about moving forward. So thought we would just dive right in. And I know, Bridge and Jean, we didn't divide up responsibilities around who is going to present different pieces. So whichever one of you wants to jump in with the principles and guiding questions and just talk a little bit about how we came up with these and how we're thinking these are going to guide the policy development process. I'm hoping that can just lead us into conversation.
Okay, what date did that document go out and come in? Should I have received it? I didn't.
Wow, it went out.
It went out last week, but we can send it to you right now.
We can resend it. I'll resend it right now.
That's okay. We'll bring it to the top of your mailbox. It's okay. Dr.
Okay.
So I just want to mention for Jean and Bridge, what we did, we had in the at the Cleveland meeting, we split off into four subcommittee groups, and one of them was the value proposition, and that value proposition work was transitioned into all the communications development work. So we asked those members of that group where they wanted to participate, and Tim and Dr. Comer are going to join the policy group, and Chris Harried, the youth commissioner on that, he's joining the partnership group. So Dr. Comer is on the call today and will be involved going forward.
Terrific.
Yeah, and Tim also obviously is going to be involved. He's just he's in India, and I think he's on this call, but we're having a little bit of trouble communicating with him.
Yeah, I think.
And Dr. Comer, I just resent the email with the framing document, so if you don't get it in the next couple of minutes, let us know.
I felt the vibration.
That's great.
So Gina, Bridge, do you want to just share a little bit around where these principles and guiding questions came from our co-chairs meeting, and maybe we can just talk through them all together and make sure that we feel like these are the ones that we've landed on, and we can build in the conversation around Jim Shelton's feedback?
Sure, I'll start. We felt like we needed some sort of set of anchor document that would guide the work and use this sort of list of actions as something that we could always go back to and check ourselves to make sure that we're honoring what we agreed to as the kind of set of principles that we wanted to operate under. And so the ones you have in front of you, these 5, are obviously the ones that we've landed on. And what we wanted to do this morning was to check against these to make sure these are the kinds of principles that the subcommittee believes are important to adhere to, and also to look at these in terms of your personal perspective and to see if we missed something here that ought to be included as some sort of guiding principle. But they are pretty quickly, I'm not going to read them all, but basically we wanted to make sure that we did all we could to build in the evidence base that we now have developed and is emerging about the way in which SEAD can boost academic learning for students. We wanted to build on this idea of building from the ground, from the place in which innovation occurs, and to honor that. And I think we want to come back to this local momentum one, because as I looked at your notes, it seems like Jim wanted to add a little bit of perspective on that one. We also wanted to make sure that we created a situation where we did not dictate the folks' solutions, but provide an environment where people could innovate and continue to grow, and we could all learn from this as we improve, that we were able to put into action these efforts in ways that would allow this to grow naturally and in a way that promotes innovation in various systems in which people sit, not to simply drop something on folks. And then finally, that we provide ways that this creates an environment for growth, not one where we give folks the answer to problems, but we find ways that as innovation occurs, that we can be supportive and adaptive as folks move forward. We felt like these were areas that we could constantly go back to, reference as the work goes forward, and use these as a basis for checkpoints against our own work. I'll pause, Bridge and others, if you wanted to add some things here.
Yeah, Gene,
No, I agree.
it's Bridge. I would just quickly add, the other thing to note is that we're very mindful of working in partnership with the Council of Distinguished Scientists. And Dr. Comer, if you haven't had a chance to read that extraordinary consensus statement, it effectively confirms 40 years of your extraordinary work. It's worth reading every word. But
Okay.
the other thing I just note on the evidence-based piece, because a lot of the, as we get into the policy discussions, we had a dinner at the American Enterprise Institute, in part because our conservative friends aren't always as easy to pull along on seed. And one thing that they were really, I think, encouraged by was the strong relationship between social and emotional competencies and all these things that we actually can measure, from better attendance to attachment to college and employment, and even civic life. So the second thing just to note too is the policy work also comes in the context of the practice agenda, which I know is moving along. And so these principles and guiding questions are going to be tethered to the work of others as well. Dr. Comer, I think you were going to say something?
No, I was just going to agree that, and just the point about the organic growth within, you create an environment that supports organic growth and innovation. That's what I feel very strongly about.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much. And, just to bring Jim's comments into the conversation, his first reaction upon reading the framing document was that the principle around building on local momentum feels right, but seems to exclude an opportunistic lens on opportunities created by national momentum. Just focusing on whether or not our objective is to leverage local efforts to create a new national context for policymakers, and thus the encouragement to change may not always originate at home. I think in a lot of ways what perhaps is reflected in this comment is the conversation that Bridge, Jean, and Ross started, which is what is the primary target for these policy recommendations, and how do we think about the connection between federal, state, and local policy. And just wanted to take a minute to continue that conversation and seem to get thoughts for folks from all of you around where you think it makes sense for us to move.
Yeah, this is Bridge. I read Jim's comment. I was really struck by it because I share his, it's almost like the virtuous circle. I love Dr. Comer's, comment that this has to be organic and fit within an ecosystem and homegrown. And if it's not that, it's not going to be effective. I think consistent with that though, and Ross and I have talked about this in our discussion with Jean and others. One of the things we identified was the pretty significant shift from federal to state and local energy around policy. But Ross and Jean and I also noted that in ESSA, there's still some fairly significant opportunities for federal reach. And one of them that I think might be in Jim's mind, but we ought to ask him, is that under the Every Student Succeeds Act, by federal law, states and districts have to identify their lowest performing schools and come up with plans to reform them. And in the first wave of reform in turning around these, low performing high schools, social and emotional development has been so much at the center of that work that I think there is an opportunity there to work. In fact, we're already working with 7 chiefs on these plans to reform their lowest performing schools and to identify those schools and to make sure SEED is a kind of a central part of it. So I guess a question for Jim is that the kind of opportunity from on high that we want to take advantage of?
Yeah, I I think it is. On the other hand, in a lot of places, you've got to be careful about who is at the practice table at the local level, and what is their real commitment to the poorest and most marginalized kids and families. And that's the role the federal government has played over the last half century. And I agree with the movement towards the local, but we've got to be sure that the local has not just a voice, but the power to protect and promote the interest of the most vulnerable.
Yeah, that's well said.
And hey, Bridge, when you say we're already working with 7 chiefs on ESSA and school improvement, who's the we that you're referring to?
I'm sorry. This is Bob Balfanson. You know, we for
Oh, got it. Yeah.
the 15 years working with I mean, terrible name, but they used to be called high school dropout factories. We're discovering everywhere was places like Tacoma and Fresno and Cincinnati and other places. That seed was really at the center of kind of a new vision for an Every Student Counts culture. And just the other little note is, you know, Gene and I've talked about this a lot, Dr. Comer, that we want to have this policy agenda really informed too by the perspectives of students and teachers and principals, those on the front lines. And in addition to making sure the local ecosystems are really honored, you know, we're trying in every creative way we can to make sure this work's infused with, you know, even this, maybe most importantly, the student perspective. So that's part of the work too.
You know, as I read Jim's comments, I think he was trying to get to this idea that he does believe that we ought to build on the local community and the energy that exists there, but that a role of this commission is to become a force or an entity that can pull all that together in a way that provides some sort of national movement. So I know that's a tricky task to carry out, but I do believe the idea of building out of local communities and helping build capacity in local communities and listening to local communities is important. But at some point, we need to recognize that a role of this commission is to help those voices come forward and to present these ideas in a way that makes sense to folks and cause folks to rally around these issues. And there is in all of this a role for research and best practice. Local communities need help as they move forward. Even though there might be a strong commitment there, they can learn from what others are doing. They can learn from research that they might not have advantage to if the commission were not in existence. So I think that's some wording, something like that ought to be built into the work we're undertaking. Not that we want to rule, not that we want to dictate, not that we want to tell folks how to do things, but there is a role for a commission here that if we were not present, this would be a much more difficult task to bring SEED into the operation of communities.
Well, sorry, this is Linda.
Linda,
I'm
welcome.
a little late. Oops, somebody else is trying to get in. Sorry.
No, go ahead,
No,
Linda. It was me, Ross, so go ahead.
I was just going to say that I know that this has been a concern of yours, Jim, and yours, Gene, as well, that if we're going to do this kind of work in a way that is capacity building and not command and control, but effective beyond the local level, we need to have a major framework for the investments in how educators are trained to begin with. Right. Because at the end of the day, it's what educators know and can do that determines the way, you know, classrooms and schools operate. And so a state and federal role is around the building of the profession's capacity to know and do the right things. I know Jim worked hard with NCAID on this, and Jean, you've worked on it for many years as well. So I hope one part of the policy framework will be a professionalizing policy that really talks about the investments and guidance around those investments that should be made in preparation, which I just finished an international study, is the work around child development, around social, emotional, academic development in many countries that is, just baked in to all of the pre-service as well as in-service training for educators is what allows them to build a different kind of system.
Yeah. Linda, it's Bridge. First of all, thanks for joining. Everything that's happening in Washington these days has given us vertigo, so we totally relate. But I wanted to, your comment is so significant and in terms of where the rubber's going to hit the road. And I remember Patricia Wool, I think it was who presented to us and talked about the social gate for learning, and then went on to say, and none of this is really being taught in the ed schools. And then you caveated that by saying there's actually quite a lot of work. And maybe the commission team already knows this, but what's the best way to get a handle on the state of teacher preparation for SEED? And, what are sort of the better in class examples of how that's working and happening? Because I think very quickly we're going to want to get to great, at least best practices and examples of how it's working.
Yeah, and there are some places we can point to as good exemplars. I'm doing some case study work now on places like Bank Street College, Alverno College, Trinity University. There are a lot of different places. Montclair State is an excellent example. But the real question for us is the policy question. How does much of the leverage on these policies occurs at the state level through licensing and accreditation? And so how do you grab a hold of those tools? And a few states have really done that. And use and leverage those tools in a way that you have high confidence that all of the schools and all of the candidates are getting what they need. And there's been a lot of good work done in some of the New England states around that. There's substantial work in places like California, Minnesota, and so on. But there's a policy system there. It's the system that governs the way the profession does its business, and we should try to figure out how to talk about that policy system in the right way.
That's so helpful. Thank you.
I just want to pause right here because it looks like a couple of other people have joined us, and I just want to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves and let everyone know that they're on the phone. So in addition to Linda joining us, it looks like Camille Farrington has joined us. Camille, are you with us?
Yes, I am with you. Hi.
And we're thrilled to have you, and feel free to jump in. You missed our brief introductions, but we're basing our conversation based upon the framing document that was sent out last week or the week before.
Yep.
And finally, it looks like there might be one other person on the phone with us. Is there someone else here? Okay, well, we have another mystery number, but great. Sorry to cut off the conversation, but I know, Ross, that you had some thoughts that you wanted to share.
Yeah, just building on this sort of how do we get the best of the require, there's going to need to be state leadership, but there's going to need to be room for local decision making and engagement as well. And I hope actually, I think one of the things that we might do is just try to frame out if there are some things that feel like they are essential, almost like infrastructure or investments that states need to make, framing policies, and then there may be a whole big range of decisions that in some states it would be natural for those to be state leadership, state policy decisions, and in other states much more likely to come from the state creating an enabling environment, but really those are going to end up being local policy decisions. And so just as we start to get into this figuring out, I think one thing that could be really useful for policymakers is almost some kind of framework that helps them think about where is it most helpful in their context for state leadership to set policy, and where in their context is it most important to, again, set broader conditions and priorities, but to make sure that local engagement, because I don't think we're going to be able to come up with, I think there's going to be a lot of places where it'll depend on your state context whether this is a good state policy or not, rather than, oh, this is a good state policy for everybody. Again, as you said, Bridge, leveraging ESSA and some of the federal obligations, in some ways, maybe one of the clearer places where state leadership is already expected and required, and so are there ways that we can shape it where it's most productive? Yeah,
well said.
Yeah, I agree with that, Ross. It seems to me that if in effect we honor, respect, and provide incentives for local development, if those locals become the real laboratory of development and improvement, then context becomes awfully important. So it seems to me a central theme that we ought to be rallying around is these two ideas that respect and honor and for the local context and innovation occurring at those local levels, but it cannot occur without a serious look at the history, the current context, the environment within states, and every state community needs to look at all of this in a very individualistic way around a set of concepts that we might come up with.
So I'm just gonna, I welcome other folks to jump in here, but I want to just move us ahead because I think that we've already we're kind of wrestling with these three large questions, which were framed out in the document as well, which I think focus on where are the opportunities to leverage the research evidence, what are the audiences that we're thinking about, and then where are the intersections with the practice change agenda and the next generation research agenda, which all are comments and conversations that have happened here in this discussion right now. And I think these are the three critical questions that we'll continue to struggle with as we move forward. And as you'll see at the upcoming commission meeting, we are going to spend a significant amount of time thinking about where the intersections are and how to move forward. But I do want to just move us along to talk about the 6 themes that we identified in the initial co-chairs meeting, and really use this time to talk about, help us prioritize these themes, help us determine where the next conversation should lead. These are what we came up with. They're not meant to be comprehensive. Do we need to add? Do we need to take away? These will be guiding our conversations in the upcoming meetings. Bridge, I don't know, or Jean, I don't know if you want to take the lead in terms of presenting what these themes are, and then we can move into conversation.
Hi, this is Camille. Can I jump in for a second and go back one slide?
Please.
I just want to, one piece that I think about a lot. So, and this definitely ties into both the work on the research evidence so far from the Council of Distinguished Scientists, and then also the research agenda going forward, which I've been working on. So, and I'm going to use an analogy. If we think about preparing teachers to be able to do seed integration, that I'm going to use the analogy of kind of what we've learned about preparing kids for the transition to high school, or preparing high school graduates for the transition to college, and which is that there's some places that you just can't prepare people for, like, you know, that the institution itself can be so toxic or misaligned or whatever. You know, you can. So what does it mean to be college ready and go into a college where the institutional graduation rate is 5%? So I'm using that to say that what we're preparing people for matters a lot about, it matters a lot as to what the context that they're going to be working in, and that I liked what it said in the framing document about both short-term and long-term policy focuses on both of those things. But I think it's that as we have these conversations, we need to be both thinking about what it means to prepare teachers to work in kind of existing traditional structures and how you might integrate social, emotional, and academic development in those contexts, while also recognizing that those contexts are not really very well aligned with social, emotional, and academic development. And there's also has to be a big push around the larger context of schooling, and, you know, how we divide up our day and how much of the time kids are spent in a classroom versus being outside of the classroom, or, you know, all of these other kinds of questions when we think about the 21st century. So I just want to kind of say that up front. So as we look through the 6 themes, that, you know, I would encourage us all to be wrestling with both what context are we preparing people for and how are we changing those contexts.
Yeah.
Camille, I think that's a really good point. And Jean, not to put you on the spot, but this was the comment that you shared when we did the first draft of the framing document. And I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind just saying a little bit more about where you see some of the tensions, even in the framework that we've laid out, and things that we do need to dive a little deeper into. Jean, you might be muted.
I was. At some point in this agenda, we did attempt to address this, but not very well. And I think it was Principle 4 under the themes later on in this document. But I think you just raised a wonderful point, and that is not only do young people have to be able to operate effectively within the constraints of existing systems, but we need to be about the business of helping folks to clarify the need for changing those systems so that there's more room for seed and other kinds of practices, and that we get clearer about what this new vision of schooling might look like. And begin to promote those kinds of changes. Our sense is that until some of those constraining environments are addressed, this is going to be a very, very difficult challenge for folks, not only for the youngsters who are trying to cope in the world, but for those who are trying to more effectively work with children. So I think when we get down to those themes, we may not be expressing that to the degree we need to, but I think you've just raised a very important point.
Yeah, and I think it's a point that you're making, Jean, that we need to be thinking about, and this fits in the policy framework, both how to transform the context teachers will be going into and school leaders, and in fact how school leaders can help change those contexts with teachers, right. As well as, you know, what then people need to learn to know. It's kind of got to go together and be intersected in the way that we think about the recommendations.
And I'm not sure that we have, at this point, raised this current conflict about being able to work in constraining environments. not in ideal situations that we would want for young people.
Mhm. And
Yeah, well, this is such an age-old problem, the chicken and the egg. You know, do you prepare people for school? Do you want them to become, or do you keep, you know, replicating the old system? And there are places where people have begun to, you know, change both sides of the equation, so to speak. And those might deserve some particular attention rather than continue to constrain our conversation to the schools invented in 1920. You know.
right.
But we are a century later, and we've got to push. I don't, you know, we haven't made progress in some places, and we can learn from some of that progress.
Well, and it also makes me wonder if part of preparing teachers is also preparing teachers for how to change systems. And,
yeah.
and a lot of that goes on, you know, the teachers have enough on their backs, so it shouldn't all be up to them, but being able to know how to Jean, I liked what you said just about also part of the commission's work has to be to make the case for why systems need to be transformed. And I think helping teachers to understand that case as well and understanding what role they might play in that seems also a critical part of their preparation and ongoing development.
Right. And I just want to, one more thought, which is that we should be saying quite a bit about the preparation of school leaders as well. Yeah. Because that's where the school designs will come from. And again, there are some places that are beginning to do this with mindfulness about child development and social and emotional as well as academic development. But we can't expect beginning teachers to come in and change schools if school leaders aren't being prepared to facilitate that.
Agreed.
So sorry to say, I just want to thank you for getting this ball rolling so beautifully. I'm very excited about where it's going. I've got to get on a different call.
Thank you, Linda.
Thanks, Linda.
Bye-bye.
So I think we'll use Linda's exit as a transition to move into a discussion of the 6 themes, which we've already started. And Bridge or Jean, I don't know if one of you wants to just maybe high level talk about all 6 of them, and maybe we can talk about them more collectively and see if there's one in particular or more that we want to dive into in the remaining 20 minutes we have left.
Yes, Bridge, I'd just say we wanted to take a step back to make sure we were identifying the major trends and kind of landscape into which this policy work was going to be emerging. I guess the big question for this larger group is, have we hit identified the key themes here? Just quickly, we all recognize the resources and education have always been at the state and local level, but under certainly the past few administrations, there's been an enormous amount of priority and focus and policy at the national level, and we all get the sense that that is clearly on the wane. Having said that, Jennifer and the team are going to do a careful analysis of ESSA to see what the opportunities are at the federal level to look at policy and to leverage that in ways that are appropriate for obviously change at the local and state levels, consistent and being highly sensitive to the ecosystems at the local level. Second, this gets to Jim Shelton's big point about SEED can sometimes be viewed as a solution or part of the secret sauce for disadvantaged students or students of certain demographics, and we want to be both sensitive to making sure that SEED is a transformative component of helping more students who are vulnerable learn and develop, but also that it's available to all students and outcomes for all students. I think these others are obvious. I'll just, Camille's comments were so on point, and I think Jean's right. Our framing document doesn't fully capture, you articulated it far better, Camille, so I hope the team took notes and we can reflect what you said in our document. But the other thing we were thinking about was, I'm leading another Aspen initiative called the Future of Work, and we're looking at the changing nature of the workforce, moving from a single employer to a contingent workforce, for example, and what are the implications of the back end, the systems that these young people are going to be entering in terms of their education development and the public policy surrounding that. So we've hit a few of the key themes in this document, but just scratching the surface. So that's something I think we need to bolster a bit. I don't know, Gene, anything else you want to highlight in terms of these six themes that might not be obvious?
I think not. I do want to raise a question, though, and I don't know if this is as clear in here as we may want it to be, given Jim's comment about all students and the need for and comment earlier about the poorest and most vulnerable kids in society. So I think both of those are really important points. I think, though, without a statement, I think we need to be explicit about the need to, our new commitment to reach all students, but I think we need something added to that about with particular emphasis on, or with renewed emphasis on those who are most vulnerable and underserved.
Yep.
Yeah, and just so you know, we are taking notes, but please keep the conversation going.
So, and this is Camille again. On that point, I really like that, and I'm wondering about a really explicit framing on that point number 2. Like one way to frame that is just around the importance of democracy and civic participation in a diverse society. Like, it's something that just about everybody needs cultural competence. Everybody needs to be able to understand, empathize with people across all kinds of difference, and that's at the heart of the, American vision for democracy, and to really, because that's a way to frame that then can both address the needs of the most vulnerable and say, this is not just the most vulnerable people who need this. Like, everybody, if our society is going to work, we all need just a much richer education in this way.
Yeah, Camille, it's Bridge on that point, and I've been pushing this one hard. Just, interestingly, and I think maybe we can reflect some of these actually quite frightening findings in the report to the nation. But Bob Putnam and I are issuing a report later, actually this week, that shows what's happened with respect to the key indicators of our civic health since he released Bowling Alone in 2000. And when you look at social trust, institutional trust, volunteering, community projects, communities of different backgrounds, intersecting, the degree of isolation in the country, it's so severe, and we're seeing the effects of it, obviously, in the current environment. I think, and we mentioned the centrality of social and emotional development to part of the cure. I think the civic effects of this work are really quite profound. The environment couldn't be more urgent to have that discussion. And interestingly, our folks on the right, when we had the dinner at AEI, one of the things they liked best about our work was our direct connection to producing, more engaged, educated citizens who can get along in a country changing demographically. So I just want to put a fine point on your point that that ought to be a key focus, because it often isn't. We tend to stop at employment, and I think we have to look at the long term about the civic effects.
Yeah, I think that's great. I do want to just see for Dr. Comer and Camille and any of our other silent participants on the phone, and Ross, of course, in these 6 themes, and we're happy to break them down. 2 questions. One, is there anything missing
And two, is there one that feels most critical to address first in our conversations as we move forward?
I don't think there's, well, I'm in agreement with much of what I hear. One thought that keeps worrying me, as we move, we often swing from one point to the other and sometimes go too far. And as we talk about local participation and voice, sometimes we romanticize and forget that we're often dealing with people, both adults and young people, who have been closed out of the system and who don't understand the system and who will need some support and help from professional people. And I guess the point I want to make is it's important not to romanticize any group or particular group, and not to exclude any particular group. It's the fusion or the integration of the professional voice and the people being served that is important. I'm not sure I'm stating that the way I want to, but that's what I'm trying to get at.
I think that's a really important point, and one that we, in thinking about this process and policy development, is one that we're trying to balance, and really thinking about what are the other voices that we want to bring into the conversation, recognizing that we can't bring everyone around the table, but who are the representative, either organizations or individuals, that we feel like can help inform this process and be reflective not only of the diversity of opinions across the political spectrum, but cognizant of the role that different stakeholders and actors in this process play.
Right.
And again, you know, to all of you, and we will follow up via email, is if there are particular organizations, individuals, or voices that you think need to be brought into this conversation, you know, please let us know. As our hope is that we will bring many of them to the table for smaller conversations during this process.
You know, it's Bridge, just on number 4, I just want to raise it for the group to struggle with. So one of the things we identified was this, you know, strong move toward every student counts culture and increased personalized learning, and, you know, all the wonder around that. We all wonder why it wasn't that way from the beginning, but clearly that's the strong movement. And you know, someone reminded me there are 50 million students K through 12 and 5 million adults. And so at some level, we have this massive human capital challenge. So I guess beyond the teachers and the administrators thinking creatively about public policy implications around, you know, counselors, and those ratios are always so dramatically high, to all the way to national service and its role in getting community-based nonprofits to offer well-trained supports to students in schools and communities in a way that, you know, fits with the local ecosystem. But I would be interested in any thoughts and ideas around how we solve this enormous, you know, human capital challenge as we become more personalized and student by student than ever before.
Yeah, well, you know, I have a great interest in team sports and athletics and the arts, and I have wondered whether we have given any thought to how those activities in school settings get at the personalization and the relationship issues and the social emotional learning issues in a way that's different from the classroom teacher. And I'm wondering if we've given any thought to that, and what have we learned from athletics in schools? And often athletics among the academic people often it's not appreciated and viewed as not as useful and not as important as the academic. And so I guess I was thinking about your question, your point about numbers, and do we know anything about the impact and effect of athletic programs in schools and coaches? Coaches, in my opinion, are a very, very valuable, or could be a very, very valuable asset in the personnel to support development. But I don't think we pay much attention to coaches.
Yeah.
And their preparation, their selection, and the way they work. And yet, I've been on the advisory committee and had the exit interview for athletes. And athletics, team sports have a tremendous impact on the development of young people.
Dr. Comer, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think maybe one charge for our group is to take your challenge up and look at, what can we find with respect to the impact of coach, is there any kind of analysis or evidence or.
Yeah.
The other thing that's interesting is Yo-Yo Ma, a group, has just started Artist Year in a lot of these low performing schools, in part because, like team sports, art and music and these other quote unquote extracurriculars, can actually be the one or only lifeline for a lot of these kids who might otherwise leave a system. So I just raised the issue because I think we ought to think creatively, and you've taken it even further in terms of sort of the human capital challenge and connecting young people to and give them reason to to stay in school beyond just what's in the classroom.
Right.
And this is Jennifer, just to chime in, I think, you'll see in this document, reflected in this document and some of the other pieces coming out of the commission, is that we're really trying to think more broadly than just teachers, but really thinking about all of the adults that interact with young people, both in and out of school. And on the partner side, have brought in some after-school organizations into the Partners Collaborative, and really thinking strongly about who are the other folks from that youth development sector that we want to be sure are reflected, because we agree, I think we need to think about balancing the in-school and out-of-school time towards our goal. I do want to be mindful of time, and we have about 5 minutes left, and I want to turn the floor over to Ross, because we've been punting around an idea around how to move forward, and I'd love for Ross to share a little bit about it and get feedback from this group.
Well, it's really an idea, Bridge, that you put on the table. But we have gotten a great response to the statements of the consensus around the scientific evidence, and so we are organizing the educator advisory panel to draft consensus statements. We convened them last week. They really dug into it. We've got a head of steam going there. And Bridge, you had put on the table, the idea of bringing together a policy advisory committee, really just get some of the most respected, best policy thinkers to come together a couple of times and see if we can't help them come to consensus around how the policy environment ought to create the conditions for seed to thrive. So just wanted to put that out to the larger group. It seems like potentially a promising both foundation for us to build on then in our work, but also a complement to the work we've done with the scholars and the educators, and could be a nice trifecta sort of for kind of presenting this work out in the field in the world. So just wanted to get folks' reaction to that, and also if people have ideas about policy thinkers across the political spectrum who would be really just really good thought partners and you think would be likely to want to dig in on this.
So Camille or Dr. Comer, do you have any thoughts on this idea of drafting consensus statements, both within, by broadening the folks involved in this work? Thumbs up, thumbs down?
I think it's a good idea. I think Linda would probably has thought about who had been working with people who could contribute a lot, and that you might want to have her make an input on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, agreed. So I don't know if you already have Tony Smith from Illinois State Ed in your circle, but he would be somebody I would be thinking about.
That's a good one.
Great. Not someone we'd had, so that's a good addition to our list. Thank you. So I do want to be mindful of time, and we just have a few minutes left, and I want to give you guys a sense of what's coming ahead. After this meeting, we're both going to revise the document that we shared in advance, get input from some of the other members who couldn't be on the phone call, and send that out to you in advance of our upcoming commission meeting in Tacoma. During the commission meeting in Tacoma at the beginning of November, we will be meeting as a policy subcommittee at 5 p.m. on the evening of the 8th. And we promise great snacks, so it'll be a worthwhile time. You know, our hope is that we can really use that time to begin to dig into what I hear you guys talking about is this idea of a framework that is flexible and malleable to think about roles for the national context, but then customizable to state context. In my mind, I'm sort of beginning to think about the decision tree type. That's not the structure, but sort of that strategy in some ways. We have two other virtual meetings scheduled. The first, Tuesday, November 8th, and sorry for the early morning West Coast folks, and then Wednesday, December 6th. You should have received these all via Outlook, and again, we're going to use this to bring other voices into our conversation once we have some of the framework more developed to get thoughts and feedback. And then finally, we're proposing an in-person meeting midday January 8th through Tuesday, January 9th, most likely in Palo Alto, California, to accommodate many of our West Coast members. We'll follow up with a scheduling request regarding that. And then finally, we're thinking about additional in-person meetings, perhaps in February as needed. And so again, we'll follow up with that. Before we sign off, wanted to see if folks had any questions. And again, we'll send all the administrative stuff via email, but just wanted to put it on the table for you guys to respond to.
It's Bridge. I just want to say thank God we have you, Jennifer. It's changed the whole thing. So we're so grateful for all the work you're doing.
My pleasure. Thanks, Bridge. All right. Well, if there's no other comments, like we said, our next step will be to send out a revised document, and we look forward to seeing all of you in Tacoma in just 3 weeks.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.